Welcome to Eerie Shadow.
I live alone in a small, dimly lit apartment tucked in a quiet corner of the city. It's the kind of place that feels forgotten, especially at night, when the streetlights cast long, jittery shadows through my half-open blinds. The building is old, creaky floors, peeling paint, and the faintest must of dust and mildew that sticks to the air like a second skin. My neighbors are few, and those who remain keep to themselves. Most nights, the city hums quietly beneath me, distant sirens or an occasional car rolling by. But when it's late, really late, there's this crushing silence that swallows everything whole, like the whole block is holding its breath. I work a regular job in an office during the day, though lately I've been less focused, distracted by the nights that always seem to turn into battles I don't want to fight. I haven't told anyone about the episodes, because who would understand? How do you explain something so intangible, yet so terrifying? It started when I was a kid. Not in this apartment. No. Back then, I lived in a creaky old house with peeling wallpaper in my bedroom. That room had a single window looking out on an overgrown backyard where shadows would stretch and twist in the moonlight. The air there always smelled musty, old wood, and dust, mixing with the scent of forgotten things. I remember lying awake, trapped by some invisible force pressing down on my chest, unable to scream or even move. Something was always there, just out of sight, lurking in the corner, whispering. It never left me, even now, in this apartment. I sometimes swear I feel that same cold weight. It's like my body remembers the fear, even if my mind wants to forget. I kept telling myself it was all in my head. Stress, anxiety. But there's a part of me that knows better. Rising action, it started again a few weeks ago, slow at first. One night, after I drifted off, I woke suddenly, chest tight, breath shallow, and that crushing pressure that felt like a fist was sitting on me. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move. Not a finger, not a twitch. I lay frozen, heart pounding so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. In the corner of my vision, just beyond the edge of my bed, I saw it, a dark silhouette, featureless but distinctly humanoid, watching. That night I heard it, the faintest whisper, like breath against my ear. But when I turned my head, nothing was there. Just the shadows dancing on the walls. I tried to shout, but the sound wouldn't come. After what felt like an eternity, the pressure eased and I gasped awake. My sheets were soaked with sweat, my heart still racing. The next morning, I found scratches on my arms, thin, shallow, but unmistakably real. I hadn't done them myself, and I was sure of it. At first, I chalked it up to sleepwalking or a bad dream. But then the episodes grew worse. Objects in my apartment began to move. Not a lot, small things. A chair slightly askew. A book on the floor flipped open to a page I hadn't read. Sometimes, I'd hear faint creaks or taps in the dead of night, like footsteps pacing just outside my door. One night, as I lay paralyzed again, the shadow leaned closer. I could almost feel its breath on my neck, cold, stale, like decay. It whispered my name over and over in a voice like gravel grinding. I started to dread sleep, but exhaustion always dragged me back. I even tried recording myself to catch proof. I set up a camera facing my bed. When I watched the footage the next day, my blood ran cold. The silhouette was there. Not just a shadow or trick of the light, solid, unmistakable, and moving with purpose. The worst night came last week. I had been ignoring the signs for too long. After a long day, I crashed onto my bed earlier than usual, hoping for rest. But then it began: the weight, the paralysis, the overwhelming pressure crushing my chest like a boulder. My eyes fluttered open to that familiar dark shape sitting at the foot of my bed. This time, it didn't stay still. It rose slowly, gliding forward with a terrifying grace. I felt its presence crawl over me like freezing oil, seeping into my skin. The whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of sibilant voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow knew was ancient and hateful. Panic surged, but I was trapped. I could only watch as the figure's shadow stretched across the ceiling and walls, growing larger, swallowing the room in darkness. Then, it reached out. I felt claws, long, blackened, jagged, scrape across my face and arms. The sting was real and sharp. I screamed silently, tears streaming, but I couldn't move. Just before I blacked out, I saw its face, or what should have been a face, a void where eyes should be. A twisting maw that seemed to suck light away. When I woke, I was sprawled on the floor. My apartment was still. The shadows retreated like a tide, leaving only the faint hum of the city outside. But the scratches were deeper now, fresh wounds, painful and raw. I started researching sleep paralysis and the folklore around sleep demons. The descriptions matched what I was experiencing exactly. But there was more. The stories about entities tethered to their victims, feeding on fear and trauma. I thought maybe, if I confronted it, I could end this. That night, I prepared myself. I set up cameras, recorded a voice note telling the figure I wasn't afraid anymore. The paralysis came again, heavy and relentless. The figure appeared, more defined this time, as if my belief had given it shape. But when I looked for it, I was still trapped, unable to move. It whispered again, closer, almost tenderly, and I realized the truth. It wasn't just a hallucination. It had been with me since childhood, growing stronger with every fear, every sleepless night. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. My body ached from the scratches and bruises that had appeared overnight. I stumbled to the bathroom, hoping the cold water might clear my head. As I stared into the mirror, my own reflection looked back, pale, exhausted, eyes bloodshot from another night of terror. For a moment, I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that all of this, the weight, the figure, the scratches, was a manifestation of my trauma, stress, and sleepless nights. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow. It wasn't cast by anything in the room, just a dark, indistinct shape behind me. I spun around quickly, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The apartment was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. I turned back to the mirror and froze. The shadow was still there. Not a trick of the light or a passing cloud. This was something else. A darkness that seemed to cling unnaturally to the corner of the room, stretching out just beyond where I could reach or see clearly. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to speak, to move away, but I couldn't. Not because of sleep paralysis this time, but because fear had frozen me. I realized then the worst part isn't just the nightmares or the paralysis. It's knowing that no matter how hard I try to outrun it, whatever this is has rooted itself deep inside me, feeding on my fear, growing stronger in the shadows of my own mind. Please call me Isco. Well, not my real name, and I guess if you're listening to this, you want to know what really happened that weekend at the mountain Airbnb. The one where everything went wrong, where an old chapel on the property wasn't as empty as it seemed. Maybe you want proof that the stories are true, or maybe just a warning. Either way, I hope this makes sense. We rented the place for a getaway, me and 4 friends, looking for a break from the city's chaos. The Airbnb was secluded, deep in the mountains, with thick forest all around. The kind of place where your phone barely gets signal, and the silence feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. The house itself was rustic, nothing fancy, but the real attraction was the property's secret, an abandoned seminary that had been shut down decades ago. Right behind the house, hidden among the trees, stood a small private chapel, locked up, dusty, but still standing. It looked like time had frozen inside. The first night, we explored that chapel. It was colder inside than outside, even though the day had been warm, and the air smelled like dust and old wood, mixed with something else, something sharp and faint like melted wax. The chapel had cracked wooden pews, peeling paint, and faded religious icons hanging crooked on the walls. Light barely filtered through the stained glass windows, casting dull, broken colors on the stone floor. While I ran my fingers over one of the pews, I noticed an old prayer etched faintly into the wood. It was in Latin. I'd taken some basic Latin in school, enough to catch a few words, a blessing, maybe, or a warning. None of us could read it completely. The night grew heavy with silence, the kind that squeezes your chest tight, and I swore I heard faint whispering, just beyond the edge of hearing, like the chapel itself was breathing softly. I tried to shake off the feeling. We left, closing the heavy wooden door behind us. But the unease lingered, crawling under my skin. The next evening, emboldened by alcohol and nervous laughter, we dared each other to go back. This time, we brought candles, cheap white ones we'd bought from a local store. The plan was simple. Light a single candle inside the chapel and read aloud the prayer etched into the pew. Just a joke, we said. A way to scare ourselves. The moment the first candle flickered to life, the air shifted. It got colder, thicker, like static before a storm. I swear I could hear the faint crackle of electricity. We took turns reading the prayer, our voices echoing unevenly against the stone walls. Then, as the last words left my lips, something impossible happened. The candle in my hand lifted itself into the air. At first, I thought one of my friends was pulling a prank. But then, all the candles started to float, spinning slowly in a circle around us, their flames burning bright and steady, even though the air was still. The smell of melted wax intensified, mixing with something acrid, sulfur maybe. The flames cast strange shadows that danced on the walls, but the shadows weren't ours. They were sharper, more defined, and they seemed to shift independently. We froze. The door slammed shut behind us with a force that made the whole chapel shudder. One of my friends, Lewis, screamed that someone was watching us. And maybe we were. I could feel it. The sensation of eyes burning into my back from dark corners. My skin prickled, hair standing on end. The whispering started again. Soft, urgent, chanting in Latin, so close I thought I could understand it. I tried to call out to break the spell, but my voice caught in my throat. The oppressive silence that fell was suffocating, as if the chapel was holding its breath. Candles flickered, flames leapt higher, then suddenly went out, only to reignite seconds later, the circle of light unbroken. That night, when we finally escaped the chapel, strange things followed us. Burn marks appeared overnight in a perfect circle on the floor of the cabin where we stayed. My phone's voice memos caught faint Latin whispers, indecipherable but chilling. And the air felt thick with a presence we couldn't see, but knew was there. The next day, a neighbor from a nearby town told us about the seminary's dark past. The chapel was closed abruptly in the 1980s after a priest was found dead inside, surrounded by burnt-out candles, his body twisted in agony. They said he'd been possessed, driven mad by something inside that place. The seminary was sealed off, abandoned ever since. The warnings were clear. Yet we'd disturbed something ancient, something angry. After that night in the chapel, nothing was the same. The presence, or whatever it was, didn't follow us in a ghostly form, but it felt like something had slipped into the edges of our reality, like a cold shadow clinging just beyond sight. We tried to convince ourselves it was all in our heads, the stress and isolation playing tricks on us. But the evidence piled up. The perfect circle of burn marks on the floor of the cabin. The whispering voices caught on my phone's voice memos, voices no one could explain, speaking Latin phrases that made my skin crawl. The candles that mysteriously relit themselves even after we blew them out, both at the chapel and back at the Airbnb. Those were real, impossible to dismiss. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt watched, like something was waiting for me in the darkness. My friends were on edge too, their laughter from earlier replaced with nervous glances and whispered arguments. Lewis said he saw shadows moving in the corner of his room, but when he looked again, there was nothing there. Desperate for answers, I went back to the seminary archives, hidden in a dusty, neglected basement below the main building. The journals I found were faded and barely legible, but they told a disturbing story. The priest who once led the chapel was tormented, believed to be possessed by something malignant. The prayer we had read wasn't just a prayer. It was a binding ritual, meant to trap that darkness inside the chapel and keep it sealed away. By reciting it aloud, we hadn't summoned anything new, but we had loosened the old seals. I don't believe in possession or spirits, not really. But I do believe that disturbing something so old, so carefully contained, can change you. Since that night, I feel different. Like a part of me is fraying, like the weight of that place settled into my bones. I don't know if it's paranoia or something worse. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the mirror and think I see a flicker of something strange in my eyes, a coldness that wasn't there before. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's fear. Or maybe, just maybe, the chapel never really let me go. I don't know what will happen next. But if you ever find yourself near that mountain, near that chapel, I beg you, don't disturb what's there. Leave the candles alone. Leave the prayers unspoken. If you can, know, you should not go to that chapel at all. Believe me, you don't want to experience what we have been through. I never considered myself superstitious. Maybe a little cautious, sure, but I didn't believe in curses or spirits or the kind of things that lurk in shadows. I'm Maya, living alone in a small, cluttered apartment tucked away in one of the oldest neighborhoods of the city. The streets are narrow, lined with brick buildings that lean a little too close to one another. and the streetlights flicker early, like they're trying to warn you to stay indoors. That night started like any other. I was out for a walk, trying to clear my head from a week of deadlines and sleepless nights. The cool autumn air bit at my skin, and the sun had just dipped beneath the horizon. I took a different route home, through a narrow alley I'd never explored before. At the end of it stood an antique store, the kind you don't notice during the day because it blends into the brickwork. But at night, it seems like it's hiding something. The sign creaked in the wind, swinging lazily like it had been forgotten for decades. I pushed open the door and a faint bell chimed. Inside, it smelled of old wood, dust, and something metallic, like iron or rust, and maybe, I don't know, old magic. The store was cramped and dimly lit, with shelves bowed under the weight of strange trinkets. Tarnished silver spoons, cracked porcelain dolls, yellowed photographs, and glass jars filled with dried herbs. I wandered around, pulled by a sense of nostalgia mixed with unease. Then, on a low shelf by the window, I saw it, a doll. Not the kind you'd expect in a child's toy box, but one of those antique dolls with glassy eyes that seemed too lifelike. Her dress was faded, the lace yellowed, and her porcelain face cracked in places. But what caught me was the eyes, dark, glossy, and somehow watching. I was drawn to her, fingers brushing the thin dust covering her. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with a worn face and eyes like dark wells, appeared silently behind me. "That one's special," she said softly. "Not many take an interest. She's been waiting." I asked about the price, and she named a figure far less than I expected. Maybe it was the way she said waiting or the chill that ran down my spine, but I paid and left with the doll tucked under my arm. That night, back in my apartment, I set her on the shelf by the window where the moonlight pooled like spilled silver. The room felt colder than usual, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long. As I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The doll's eyes seemed to glimmer in the dark, almost like they were blinking. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the moonlight, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The nightmares started the very next night. I dreamt of a crumbling graveyard, the gates rusted and hanging crooked on their hinges. Shadowy figures hovered near the gravestones, whispering words I couldn't quite catch, their voices low and cold. A chill that wasn't just from the night air crawled up my spine. I woke gasping, heart hammering, sweat soaking my sheets. After that, the doll's behavior worsened. I'd leave the room, only to come back and find her in a slightly different position. Her head tilted at an impossible angle, fingers curled in a way they hadn't been before. Sometimes, I heard a faint creaking sound, like old joints shifting, coming from the shelf. One night, the coldness in the room became unbearable, and I felt a clammy chill wrap around my skin. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm up, but it felt like the cold was coming from the doll itself. The glassy eyes seemed to follow me, unblinking, unyielding. Then the scratching started. At first, it was faint, just light, almost imperceptible scratches along my arm as I slept. When I woke and checked, there were tiny red marks, like tiny pinpricks. The skin tingled and stung as if I'd been clawed by some invisible animal. I tried ignoring it, blaming stress or restless nights. But then I heard the tapping. In the dead silence of my apartment, right around midnight, I'd hear nails tapping rhythmically against wood, the window frame, the floorboards, sometimes the door. It always stopped when I turned the lights on, but I'd lie awake listening, heart pounding, too scared to move. A neighbor warned me once. Mrs. Larkin, a woman in her 70s who lived across the hall, stopped me in the hallway one day. "Be careful with old things," she said, voice low and trembling. "Not everything should be disturbed. That doll, it's been in this building longer than any of us. And there's stories, dark stories." I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. Desperate, I tried moving the doll into a box in the closet, hoping that would stop whatever was happening. But every morning, the box would be open, the doll sitting exactly where she was before, on the shelf, staring. My dreams became worse. The graveyard was more vivid now. I could see the cracked headstones clearly, and the shadowed figures whispered louder, their voices like cold breath on my neck. Sometimes, I felt like something was right behind me when I woke, heavy and unyielding. One night, I woke in full paralysis. The crushing weight of fear pinned me to the mattress, and I couldn't move a muscle. I heard breathing, slow, ragged, just inches from my ear. The doll was leaning over me, eyes glossy and reflecting the dim moonlight. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was trapped. When I finally broke free, I found fresh scratches on my chest, deep and raw. I realized then this wasn't just a doll. It was something else, something alive. I needed answers. I went back to the antique store the next day, but it was gone. The alley was empty, the door sealed shut and covered in peeling paint, as if no one had been there for years. I asked around the neighborhood, and what I heard chilled me more than the doll ever did. The building where I lived was once owned by a woman named Agnes Marlowe, a local woman accused of witchcraft decades ago. They said she was buried alive in the nearby graveyard, cursed and forgotten. The doll was rumored to be hers, a vessel for her trapped soul. I tried to get rid of the doll. I threw it into the trash, smashed it, locked it in the basement, but the scratches kept appearing. The tapping, the creaking, the cold. The nightmares never stopped. One night, I sat in front of the mirror, exhausted and terrified. The doll sat on the shelf behind me, moonlight casting its shadow across the wall. And then I saw it, a dark, distorted shape stretching behind me, too large and twisted to be my own. The doll blinked once, slowly, deliberately. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone. For the past few months, I've been on the move, 3 different homes in as many seasons. It's not by choice, really. Life forced me into this strange pattern of uprooting, a slow unraveling I didn't see coming. I started in a modest suburban house, the kind with large windows that catch the afternoon sun just right, making the dust motes dance in golden light. It was cozy, but quiet, too quiet. Then came the cramped city apartment with its flickering fluorescent lights and the constant hum of distant sirens. The walls felt too close, the air stale, and the lights made shadows creep oddly across the cracked plaster. I thought the noise would drown out whatever haunted me, but it didn't. Finally, I fled to a dim cabin near the woods, isolated, with narrow windows that let in slivers of cold, gray daylight. The trees pressed close outside, dark and unmoving, and inside, the shadows seemed to have a life of their own. That's when everything spiraled out of control. From the very beginning, I noticed something strange, something I couldn't quite explain. At the edge of my vision, just where my focus blurred, there were these black shapes. They looked humanoid but too dark, too still. Whenever I tried to look straight at them, they vanished like smoke. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was stress or exhaustion. But the feeling never left, the prickling on my skin, the cold static in the air, the soft whispering that no one else could hear. It felt like something was watching me. And as I moved from place to place, those shadows followed, lurking just out of sight, growing bolder. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe it was always there, hiding behind the fragile cracks of my reality. The first real sign came in the suburban house. One afternoon, I was reading by the window when I noticed the corner of my eye catch a movement, a figure, black as spilled ink, melting into the shadow beneath the curtain. My heart hammered, but when I blinked and turned, there was nothing. Just the lazy sway of the curtain in the afternoon breeze. It wasn't until that night that the unease grew. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. I felt the room chill suddenly, like a wave of cold breath brushing my neck. I glanced toward the hallway and saw, just for a heartbeat, that same shadow figure standing just beyond the doorway. Its shape was vague but unmistakably humanoid, tall, featureless, and impossibly dark. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I felt my skin crawl, every hair standing on end. I could hear a faint whispering, soft and unintelligible, as if the shadows were murmuring secrets just beyond my hearing. I started noticing it everywhere after that. Flickering lights in the city apartment would distort images on my phone screen, glitches revealing quick glimpses of those black shapes, figures standing just behind me. The static buzz in the air would spike whenever they were near, like the crackle before a thunderstorm. Candles I lit would suddenly go out. Papers on the desk would flutter though the windows were closed. The shadows no longer waited to be seen. They were making their presence known. Yet, whenever I tried to focus, to confront them, they slipped away. A neighbor in the city once warned me, "You look like you're seeing things, but maybe you're not. Some things don't want to be noticed." I laughed it off nervously, but the words stuck with me. At the cabin, things reached a terrifying peak. The light was always dim, natural daylight filtered through thick branches. The shadows were sharper here, more tangible. One evening, as I sat by the flickering fireplace, I saw a shadow figure move across the far wall, a tall silhouette that didn't belong to anything in the room. I called out, voice trembling, "Who's there?" Silence, then a suffocating quiet, thick enough to choke on. Then came the tapping, slow, deliberate, like nails scratching wood, echoing from the far corners. I couldn't tell if it was inside my head or real. The shadows whispered louder, like voices just beyond hearing. I tried everything lights on, doors locked, cameras rolling. I set up my phone to record overnight, hoping to catch proof. When I checked the footage, I saw flashes of those black figures, only visible in the grainy flicker of the screen. But every time I tried to share or explain, the world looked away. I felt isolated, like I was losing my mind. The breaking point came late one night in the cabin. I woke to a sudden, chilling draft that snuffed out all the candles. The room plunged into darkness, thick and suffocating. The air was electric, buzzing with static that made my teeth clench. I felt them there, those black shapes, circling closer, just beyond sight, just at the edges of the dark. Their whispering became a low chant, words I couldn't understand, but that pierced my bones. My skin prickled unbearably, and my heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst. Then, out of the corner of my eye, a figure stepped forward, a shadow so dense it swallowed the faint firelight, a silhouette tall and featureless, frozen with terror. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. The shadow leaned closer, the air growing colder with its breath. Then I saw it, my own face, fractured and reflected in that blackness. 1,000 broken pieces of myself, twisting and merging with the shadows. The truth hit me like a blow. These weren't strangers lurking in the dark. These were parts of me. Fragments of pain, guilt, and trauma I'd buried deep, now manifesting as shadow people, hunting me down to reclaim what I tried to hide. The figure reached out, and I felt my identity start to dissolve, the edges of my reality blurring into the darkness. In the aftermath, I was no longer sure what was real. My reflection in the cracked window was wrong. Sometimes it moved independently, a shadow mimicking my every twitch. My voice felt distant, like I was speaking underwater. I tried to run, to escape the cabin, but the shadows followed. Each move fractured me more, splintering my mind and soul into pieces. I found myself talking to the shadows, begging them to stop, to leave me be. But they only whispered back, repeating words I couldn't understand, echoing my own fears. I recorded messages to myself, hoping to find the part of me still whole. But the recordings caught only silence and static.